Uh, my name's Prescott Johnson. Welcome to the channel. The purpose of the channel. This book was published in 1908. Piano tutorial method. Many people familiar with like Lila Fletcher and John Thompson and such. Anyway, the company, the Willis Music Company, which is still in business. I don't know if they do much publishing still or how that's all going, but they published this back in 1908. I think that they were associated with the publication of John Thompson's material. My interest in this particular work is that in the 70s, when I took piano lessons as a teenager, this was the method that was recommended by Graham Steed, or was used by Graham Steed. Most of it isn't in the method. It's in the teacher. And Graham Steed was an extraordinary teacher and did not deserve me as a student. But there were other students who were quite talented, and which I found over the years, or the 5 years that he was in the area. When in 2012 I had a mini stroke, or a stroke, or series of strokes or something, I had lost a lot of dexterity. Now, not that it mattered at the time, because I was hardly doing anything, largely because I had a very busy work schedule. And so I hadn't really been playing piano or doing anything after I had done classical studies for those 5 years. After leaving that book, I did take up doing some writing and so composition work, writing music, songs, putting music to lyrics and poetry, and I kept always, even if it was only in my mind, the music never stopped. But work usually got in the way of being able to pursue those endeavors anyway. So of course, when I had the stroke, it was kind of like whatever ability that I had in my hands was pretty much nullified. And I know that a number of months after the stroke, that I couldn't even play a C scale without fumbling all over the place. And a few years later, even though I could manage the C scale, I couldn't even play anything on the black notes because my fingers would just kind of slip off. And so anyway, just was frustrating. So I just put that all in the back burner and was like, okay, I had my doubts that we're ever going to be able to go down that route. And so I just carried on with work and paying bills and my other interests, so a couple of years ago, as I would do over the years, if I found a piano that was unguarded and there was nobody around to hear my violations to the ear, I would sit down and I would plunk away. And about 2 years ago, I realized that just through the time that had passed since the stroke, that I had acquired enough muscle, dexterity, finger control. It's certainly not perfect, because even now, being able to be consistent is still very difficult. But at least I can play well enough to actually get some satisfaction out of it. So anyway, I rehabbed. I went and I bought another piano, and I went looking for my Peters book that I had learned on back in the 70s, and couldn't remember where it got to. So anyway, so I went on eBay because I knew it had been published in 1908, and of course discovered when I started looking around that is the only publication date for any of those books. And there are books out there, but they're usually well marked up and brutalized, and so I had gotten a couple of books, and there were marks all through them, and I wanted to clean them up and photocopy them and put them into PDF and use it on my tablet. So that's what I did, and cleaned it up, and some of it's like pen and Crayola crayon and all the rest. And so I went and I cleaned them up and made them look pretty good. And what I couldn't fix with a rubber eraser, I put into a graphics program and fixed up the problems there. Anyway, sometime later I did a search again for the book, which is kind of funny, because I have a link posted to the archive.org site, because about 2 months after I had gotten the last Peters book, according to the date on archive.org, they had actually published the Peters book in pristine, like there was no marks or anything, and high resolution. And anyway, it's pristine. It's wonderful. So I started reintroducing myself right from the very beginning of the book, and I did everything as I had recalled the kinds of insistences of Steed in terms of technique and your hand and arm position and all the rest of it. And so I basically started from the very beginning, and couldn't believe how hard it was at first, but largely unfamiliar with a lot of it. And it wasn't that I didn't recognize a C or know a difference between a C and a D. That wasn't anything like that. It was just, it was everything kind of connecting together from seeing and doing. And so I worked on rehabbing my hands with that piece. And then as I got away from the more rudimentary aspects of the piano, getting past knowing the staves and the notes in several different hand positions and get a few keys, then they start exploring these pieces that were written back. Most of them would have been written in the late 1800s, and they were beautiful pieces, simple pieces, but beautiful. And it was something that I never appreciated when I was a teenager, but it was something that I appreciated this time around. And because of my, since being a teenager and my experience as writing my own music and my interest in that, I began hearing these melodies and then reimagining them with harmonies against them, and or just making some style changes, or wandering off the range with some more almost like a bluesy, jazzy effect at times. And I thought to myself, it's like, even though I don't play blues or jazz, and it started making me think, it was about, wouldn't it be kind of cool if in the course of learning a new skill along the way, that you could repurpose the new skill to a song that you've already learned earlier. You go back to revisit the song and you incorporate the changes that are meant to reinforce this new skill that you learned. Now, people would say, well, why would you do that? They're going to be reinforcing it in the pieces that they learn moving forward. And it's kind of like, well, yes, it does. You're right about that. I'm not saying that that's not right. But to open up the door to having an easy acquisition, learning a new piece, the sight reading, and plus continuing to add new skills to the playing. If you can go back to a piece that you've already learned, and that the only thing that you're really doing is you're just modifying very little in order to use that new skill. And if you do that, then you then end up, instead of having to force your way through, and I don't say that in a negative way. I mean, you undertake learning a new piece and sight reading and so on, and you get to enjoy it then. But wouldn't it be advantageous to actually go back to a piece that you played before, and you have an alternative version that would show you all the new skills that you've acquired between then and when some of these skills get added? Like, it's not like you do it for every piece every time, and so on, but we no longer are bound by paper. We have this free program called MuseScore, and what I, because that's one of the things that I wanted to do, was I wanted to recreate the Peters book in MuseScore, because it doesn't exist anymore. I mean, there are copies out there, and they are available on archive.org. So, but I wanted to create a digital version, it's going to be crisper, and easier to read, I hope. And because I got most of it inputted into MuseScore, I'm just now doing the finessing of the aesthetics, making it look right, because sometimes MuseScore doesn't really understand what you might want it to do. It's doing what it's been programmed to do, but it gives you the ability to kind of finesse it, and that's what I want to do. The idea is then, if you can produce a PDF, which you can print it off if you want, or you can just look at it on your tablet, you could have 10 variations of a song, all in PDF, that would show the original, and then what happens when these various skills, and like it doesn't cost anything for a PDF. It's like you could have 10 different variations of a piece. You can create your own. MuseScore is free. Download MuseScore, import the MuseScore file that I will be posting with the PDF, and you can import that into MuseScore. You can make your own modifications if you want, being able to repurpose a piece of music that conceivably could be used several times through the book as you acquire more skills. Now, that might not be something that you might actually want to do yourself, but I know I'm going to be certainly contributing some of my own ideas, and I'm also going to be making contact with some of these musicians that are really quite talented, and ask them, because many of them so talented that they'd be able to sit down and look at that thing. And I know this because one of Steed's students came and did an organ recital at the Baptist church, and Steed and one of his students presented a very simple piece, and the guy basically, he goes through it. It was probably like 16 bars, or might have been 24 or 32. But anyway, presents this piece, very simple. And so he plays through it exactly verbatim of what's on the page in front of him. And then the next time he adds something, changes something, approaches it differently. And then and every time he would play through that, he did that. I don't know how many minutes he went on playing this piece, but it was like it just got more complex over time. And I'm not at that level, but I know that there are people out there who are and would be able to do this in very short order. So I'm gonna see if I can get any contributions that way. But if not, and if the only thing that I'm able to do is to make the piece available, or the PDFs available, then that's fine too. What I also want to do is I want to draw attention to some of the composers that contributed to this material, because their catalog of material is far more extensive than what is in here. These are, these were real musicians, real, and back in the day, most of them were organists in churches, and because that was where a lot of musicians and singers actually emerged from the church, because the church was a place where music was an important element of the service, their worship. It's not surprising that this is the case. Some of these people are very accomplished musicians in their own right, and so it's kind of a hat tip to the past of the contributions that they made towards musical education. So one of the other things that I will be posting, I will be adding playlists of YouTube material, because I have found some of the composers that contributed to the Peters book. So I'm going to try and at least make it far more interesting than just, having some music scores up there. Anyway, that's it.